Hello and a very warm welcome to Rajya Sabha TV's coverage of Budget 2021-22. I'm Frank Rausen Pereira. Well, Union Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman on Monday presented the budget for the fiscal year 2021-22, which she said was prepared under circumstances like never before. She said that the government, however, was fully prepared to revive economic growth in the country. This budget provided every opportunity for the economy to capture the pace it needs for sustainable growth, is what she said. The Union Minister said that budget stands on 6 pillars: health and wellness, physical and financial capital, inclusive development for aspiring India, to infuse new life into human capital, innovation and R&D, and minimum government and maximum governance. Recalling the Atmanirbhar packages announced for the people in view of the COVID-19 pandemic, Sitharaman said that the 3 stimulus packages provided last year were like 5 mini budgets before the budget for this financial year. The minister announced a budget of 35,000 crore rupees to vaccines against the coronavirus pandemic. Over the next 30 minutes, we will analyze the highlights of the budget. Joining me on the program now are Sanjay Agarwal, President, PhD Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Also with me is Shubhamoy Bhattacharjee, Consulting Editor of the Business Standard, and also on the program right now, Vineet Agarwal, President, ASSOCHAM, and Ashok Kumar Jha, also former member of the Finance Ministry, joins us on the program. He was the Finance Secretary, Ministry of Finance, Government of India. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of this special telecast. All right. So, Mr. Jha, let me start the program with you first. What were the 3 key highlights, 3 takeaways for you from the budget?
Well, I think the first most important highlight was what the budget did not contain. That is, I think that was more important or equally important along with the elements of the budget. See, people were expecting some level of taxation somewhere, whether it was in the form of a COVID cess or in the form of wealth tax, etc. Since that didn't happen, it really cheered everybody. The second highlight, I think, is that the focus was very, very strong on investment. In terms of investment in infrastructure, the outlay for health has been increased, and there is a provision for setting up textile parks. So these are all, investment-oriented measures. And the third most important thing was about the finance, the cleaning up of the financial system in terms of recapitalization of banks, setting up of new DFI, and which would then be lending long-term. I think these were the 3 main highlights.
Absolutely. All right. Mr. Sanjay Agarwal, let me come across to you now. From an industry point of view, from an industry standpoint, what were the key takeaways for you?
I think the major takeaway for me is the stress on infrastructure and investment. I think that is something that cannot be stressed enough. Our PhD chamber has been talking about this for the last full 1 year during the pandemic times, especially during the pre-budget discussions. We have been requesting that we must front-load the national infrastructure pipeline expenditure as much as possible. We are looking at 111 lakh crore of a pipeline, which is to be, that is to be invested over the period of next 5 years. And at the very least, even if you do an equal expenditure, we need to spend 22 lakh crores approximately every year. Probably we need to further front-load it. So on that front, I think the budget has come about to be on a very, very positive note, very positive direction. I think all possible aspects are being taken care of. The budgetary provisions themselves are talking about 5 lakh crore plus. I think it's 35% increase over the last year's capex. On top of that, there is a large amount of investment that one hopes will come from the proposed new mega development financial institution, into which the government will invest 20,000 crores. But end of the day, we are looking at 5 lakh crores of funding being available. What we really hope is that this becomes the venture capital or the seed capital for a lot of other infrastructure investment to happen in the country. Because right now, what the economy needs is a hefty injection of investment that is going to give us not only a very good multiplier of GDP, which is estimated at 2.5 times the investment made, but also is going to be the best possible solution to the employment worries that we have. I think the investment in infrastructure, whether you build roads, railways, or ports or whatever, I think all of that is going to add hugely to our unemployment issues to being sorted out, as also the GDP growth. So all said and done, I think the focus on infrastructure, and then the third major part of that is the all possible means of raising finance in addition to the budget, in addition to the DFI being formed, is the total stress on disinvestment. I think we have not been very successful in our disinvestment for the last 2 years. We did less than 50% in the year ended March 20.
Right.
In the year ended March 21, we expect just 10 or 15% of the target being done. But this year's targets on disinvestment are very huge, and we are looking at some major mega disinvestments, which include BPCL and which include Container Corporation and which include Air India.
Right.
On top of that, the government is very clear about disinvesting surplus land,
Sure.
for which special company is being formed. I think SPV is being formed, and that has been a major suggestion of our chamber, that we must form an SPV which should take care of all the technical issues about ownership of land and titles of land,
Right.
which is vested in various PSUs. So all of this said and done is something very, very positive and forward-looking.
Absolutely. All right.
To my mind.
Shubhamoy, let me take this particular aspect forward with you of disinvestment. And do you expect the target that has been set to be met? Because in the past, we've seen that the targets, it has been difficult to meet some of the targets that have been outlaid.
That's true. I mean, disinvestment is always a game that the government has to play with the market. And the government, any government isn't particularly good one at playing that game. This year, of course, they've got a huge advantage. An LIC IPO, given LIC's valuation, that would immediately mean something like 80 to 90,000 crore at just one shot.
Absolutely.
So that would immediately do half the disinvestment target. Plus, if you've got BPCL coming through, you're home. So essentially, it's just two transactions this year, which essentially would sort of be the disinvestment thing. And if once these two happen, and since IPCL, since LIC valuation is already almost done, so give another few months for the IPO red herring prospectus and others to be filed, shouldn't be a problem this year. I mean, you just ride home on these two transactions.
Absolutely. All right. So, Mr. Mohit Agarwal, let me come across to you now. From a services point of view, do you believe that more could have been done because it was a sector that was badly hit as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic? And let's not forget, the pandemic is still not behind us. We are still in the midst of the pandemic, and we are trying to sort out several issues. Of course, India has taken a lead as far as COVID management first, and then vaccine distribution as well as vaccine development too. We are doing a fantastic job. But as far as the services sector is concerned, could more have been done?
So yes, you're right that services sector has been the most badly hit in the last few months. We've all been consuming more products versus services. I mean, we're not going to restaurants, we're not going for holidays. So clearly this sector, these sectors related to services have been hit very badly. Certain sectors have done well in services, for example, online deliveries, logistics and so on, relatively better. So it is a sector that requires a lot of support. A lot of the sector is also driven by MSMEs. And so what the government has done in this budget is a lot of support to MSMEs. Some of that had already started with the announcements that the finance minister had made in the last few months with the credit schemes. But other than that, decriminalization of LLPs or allowing startups with just one-person companies or even increasing the limits for paid-up capital and the additional money that is being allocated towards MSME growth will also help the services sector. So we have not seen any direct support that is coming for any targeted sectors in services sector industries. But broadly speaking, I think some of these will certainly help the services sector.
All right, taking the discussion forward now, one of the panelists brought up the issue of infrastructure and how there has been a massive infrastructure push. Is that something, Mr. Jha, that can address the issue of employment as well? Because that was a major concern area over the last 10 months.
Well, it would address the issue of employment because, but it may not address the issue of employment immediately, because unless the infrastructure projects are got off the ground immediately, the people who are unemployed, and CMI estimates of December showed that there were about 15 million people who were unemployed. Apart from that, there are many people who are employed, but the quality of their employment has deteriorated. So if infrastructure would definitely give a fillip to employment, but it may take a while before it does that. The fact that the demand for Manrega has gone up substantially in the past few months shows that there is huge demand for employment, and people are prepared to take up whatever job comes their way. So all in all, I think employment issue would be addressed, but it may take some time before it is addressed satisfactorily.
And since we are here, something related to infrastructure, let's talk about the power sector as well. Mr. Sanjay Agarwal, there has been a major push as far as the power sector is concerned. There is a lot of focus on renewables and solar energy as well. Once again, something that is in line with what we have seen over the last few years. How is that likely to help the economy as a whole?
Frank, I think power sector has been, I think, given some proper consideration this year in terms of the sort of reform that is being looked at and the sort of financial support that is going to be made available to the DISCOMs, only on the condition that they do not continue to be loss-making. A 3.05 lakh crore expenditure over the next 5 years is what is being planned. And to my mind, this should substantially help alleviate the difficulties in the power sector. So that is something that we should be looking forward to, hopefully, because this has been a sector which has been in perennial trouble, despite all the schemes that were hopefully going to take away the vows. I think they have worked partly, and partly they still needs to be work to be done. So I believe this could be something that that could help at least those states which do decide to take some positive action.
Shubhamay, just to continue where we are at right now, this is of particular interest to you, I know, because you are an energy man. So from that perspective, especially renewables and solar energy. Clearly, the budget suggests that that's the way forward for us to ensure that, the problems that the DISCOMs are facing, try and negate them, try and deal with them, and also give the consumers a few more choices.
That's right. And you notice a very interesting statement that she made, which was that, we have been talking a lot about the fact that power sector doesn't have open access. What it simply means is, from the consumer's point of view, that consumers should have the right to decide from which power utility you buy electricity. This had been very strongly, opposed by lots of companies. And this time the finance minister said that we are actually moving on that line. She actually talked in fair amount of detail of the fact that the power sector, that in cities, consumers will have the right to break the monopoly of just single distribution company. I think it's very necessary. When we are talking of 24/7 electricity, when we are talking of rights of electricity consumers, then it's absolutely necessary that that right should mean the right to choose who can provide competitive electricity. So pricing of electricity is a very good place to start. And I particularly took, I like that comment. That's something that is something which has been very necessary and bundled along with the fact of renewable energy. She talked about hydrogen mission, which the government has already given a green signal to. So that means basically what we're talking about green recovery, which has been a very major issue coming out of COVID, that the smart countries would take up recovery themes which would be environmentally useful. That theme runs very well through the power sector reforms. So all in all, that part of it, I have a good reason to have to say that those were the right words and makes the right noises and since these are budget announcements, obviously these would be followed up by the government in terms of clear policies and statements through the year.
Absolutely. And since we're talking about
may I
recovery,
add something to what Subhamoy said?
Yeah, please go ahead.
To what Subhamoy said.
Go ahead.
I think what's one thing that's been happening is that even though on paper there was the choice, at least to the industrial consumer, to buy energy from wherever that company wishes, practically the individual states have levied so many haulage charges and so on and so forth, the different varieties of charges, that it has become practically impossible to have a free choice of energy. So that's why I would like to second Subhamoy's point that it is very, very important that the central government has shown a very strong intention to provide the consumer the choice to buy power, whom to buy from.
Absolutely. All right. So, Vineet Agarwal, let me bring you in. And, Subhamoy was talking about green recovery. Let's talk about the V-shaped recovery as well, something that has been spoken about of late over the last few weeks. So, is it safe to say that the worst is behind us? What is it that we need to brace for going forward?
We have seen a lot of positives in the last few months. I mean, today's figures of GST collection being high, railway freight increasing, auto sector doing well, power generation or power demand being very high. These are all indicators towards a recovery. Now, that recovery needs to be sustained going forward. We are right now in a sort of a V-shaped recovery, but that V-shaped recovery should not become a W-shape. We should not fall down. So that continuation would mean that some of this announcements that have been made today as part of the budget, the execution starts right away. Some of this we have to start delivering on this as soon as possible. Because if we have to move away and take advantage of the fact that the rest of the world is not doing as well as we are, and the fact that we have a very strong vaccination program that is started and will be underway, that confidence building measure has started. And that confidence building measure will certainly help us now sustain that recovery. So I'm quite confident that some of this will come back, but the action needs to be continuous and relentless.
Absolutely. All right. Taking the discussion forward now, Mr. Jha, another key highlight area I would think would be health sector. 137% increase really as far as budget allocation is concerned, something that was expected considering what we saw over the last 10 months and seeing what kind of an impact the pandemic has had across the globe. India deciding to better healthcare services across the country as well. Clearly a welcome sign.
Yeah, it definitely is. Given the fact that we were struck by this pandemic for the past many months, but here what worries me really is that the overall revised estimates of expenditure for the current financial year and the budget estimates for 21-22 are almost identical. See, in the current year, the revised estimate is 34.50 lakh crores, and the following year, 21-22, it is 34.83 lakh crores. So there is, the extra money expenditure, where it is going to come from, and whether that kind of money will be available. That's the first point. The second issue is that health is really a state subject. So it is far better, in my view, to empower the states to spend the money, because they would be in a better position to essentially ensure that whatever facilities are being created are right at the grassroots level, which can be monitored by them at the grassroots level. The other point, which is not connected with health, and with your permission, if I may mention it, it is that, there is a huge number of items on which custom tariffs have been imposed. If you take that in conjunction with what has been done over the last couple of years, it shows that a very large number of items, the custom tariffs have been introduced.
Right.
Now, this is not particularly good for exports, for growth of exports. And I'm not very sure how this is going to be reconciled with that.
Okay. Let me get closing comments in from all the other panelists as well. I've got very limited time. I've got about 2 minutes on the program. So I'm asking you to be, I request you to be brief, starting first with you, Mr. Sanjay Agarwal.
Well, you see, overall, I would say that the budget is on the lines that we requested, or rather expecting the budget to be, and I think that is a positive. One or two aspects that we still feel need a lot of consideration still is specifically regarding telecommunication sector, for which we have not seen much. I think all this pandemic has taught us is the huge role that the telecom sector has played in facing up to this pandemic. And we are not seeing any major moves on the side of telecommunication industry. I think that needs to be taken care of, in the sense that we have to ensure that despite the announcements that have been made earlier, we have not been able to really reach optical fiber to every village as we wanted. So that is one part. The second part
I'm going to cut you short, Mr. Agarwal, because I have to get in comments from the others as well. Shubhamoy?
Okay.
Well, I like the fact that the numbers in the budget this time are transparent and honest. Making off-budget borrowings as part of the budget is something which the market likes. And this is a very good point to start off a fiscal year. Essentially, that's very good. There's also an important part that the government is now going to spend about 28% of its money for this year in the next 3 months. There's a huge demand boost that's coming. However, it'll be an interesting thing to see what it does for the rest of the economy. And I don't think the idea that budgets should go around pleasing sectors is a good idea, particularly. Okay. It actually creates distortions.
All right.
It has stayed away from a good idea.
All right. And Vineet Agarwal, please close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
Well, I certainly believe that the whole aspect of this fiscal expansion with the expenditure on capex related versus revenue expenditure is brilliant in terms of long-term future for our country. The infrastructure pipeline bill is critical, is key. The challenge will remain execution. We've seen that in the past also. There have been some great plans that originated but not concluded. So execution will be critical.
Absolutely. I think that's a very critical point that you raised. And on that note, I'd like to call it a wrap on this edition of this special telecast. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it from me. See you again next time.
Today, our question was that the roots of Whistleblowers Protection Act 2014 lie in. Your options were A. The Law Commission year 2001, B. Second ARC report year 2007, C. UN Convention Against Corruption, and D. All of the above. And the correct answer is D. All of the above. What is fiscal deficit? Fiscal deficit is the difference between what the government spends and the revenues it receives. It represents the total funds it has borrowed to meet its expenditure. It's the gap between the total spending and the sum of its revenue receipts and non-debt capital receipts. What is Consolidated Fund? Consolidated Fund is made up of all revenues and loans raised by the government. It also includes receipts from recoveries of loans granted by it. All government expenses are paid out of the Consolidated Fund. No amount can be withdrawn without Parliament's approval.